We're formed by geography. Whether you live on the internet or you live in a country or you travel a lot, you're formed by geography. Geography is fundamental to so much as we have freed ourselves through what I call the hive mind of the internet. We're nonetheless formed by geography. And so when the Armenians as a code, as a people, were first recognised in Persepolis in circa 550 BC, they were formed by geography. They were bringing horses to the Shah of Iran. The geography of Armenia is a strange one in the sense that it is, of course, as we all know, at crossroads of Asia and Europe, and therefore it's at crossroads of various belief systems, Christianity, Islam, Eastern Bloc, Western Bloc. And one of those crossroads in recent times has become this street called Bagramyan, which happens to be the street on which the government has its governing building, which I believe was established during the Soviet period, which went from 1921 to around figures 1991. So in 1991, Armenia declared independence. There are very few countries in the world that are independent. I would imagine that China, maybe Russia, certainly the United States are independent. I think everybody else isn't really independent. And so Armenia, because of its geography, because of the way in which independence was achieved, unfortunately inherited a succession of very authoritarian rulers. And through authoritarianism, it weakened its economy to such an extent that Hovhannes Shiraz starts to cry on one of the items of currency. And the authoritarianism was maintained, as a lot of authoritarians do, by figures that look like this. Ara the rat draws the police officer eating ice cream. And as the authoritarianism became ingrained, immigration and wilting of the culture became well established. People started making fewer films because there wasn't the money. There was, of course, the war with Azerbaijan over Artsakh. There was the unfortunate speed with which de-Sovietization occurred, which I will add was partly because of the way the West wanted it to occur, meaning Western advisors asked for a speedy change, they got a speedy change, and some of the Western advisors that I follow now regret having advised that there should be speedy change. In the speedy change, as I say, immigration increased, the economy fell into the hands of essentially 20 to 30 people. And among the smartest, most intelligent, most well-connected Armenians found themselves in Moscow, Los Angeles, Sydney, and other parts of the diaspora. And so a lot of the painters left as well, and it was sad. And people put up with that because they didn't have many options. There was the war against Azerbaijan, there was the blockade with Turkey, there was the constant pressure the United States puts on Iran to the south, there was the disagreements between the Georgians and the Russians and the people inside Georgia who seek their own independence. And so consequently, Armenia, being a landlocked country, is caught between all of that. But people protested, and there was a series of protests over a long period of time. They protested over electricity and its prices. They protested over the way the government was run. They protested over the hiking of prices for simple things like bus tickets. And then in 2016, certain individuals decided to take up arms and protest because the message appeared not to have got through to Bagramyan Avenue. And so we then went through a bit of a charade, as we might describe it now with the benefit of hindsight, and we decided to change the constitution and to indicate that there was a bright future ahead. And so in 2017 we had an election and we ended up with electoral fraud. It's interesting when you look at who writes books and what they write about. Armenians have a disproportionate focus on the past, but we're happy to have with us tonight at least one person who thinks about the future. The Blue Man, Smart Nation by Sason Grigoryan, and The Grey Book, which is by Irena Rapalyan, who lives in the United States. These are two books, two rare books, because they actually focus on what might the future be. People who think about the future have to be very creative. As an intellectual property lawyer, I kind of live in the future, so I describe my life as involving future sickness, because I'm constantly having to think about what's in the future. It's a lot easier to think about the past, a lot harder to think about the future. Fortunately, over the last 3 weeks, we've watched certain people who for months, if not years, have benefited from those who've been thinking about the future. So they came up around the middle of April with certain protest strategies that were highly creative. One of them was, we're not going to just go to Balgramian and stand, we're going to move around the city. We're going to move non-stop. We're going to have live streaming YouTube videos showing us as we walk around. We're going to have thousands of people all over the place watch. And the police officer, Mr. Ovsipyan, is going to walk with us. We're going to chat with him. We're going to keep him amused, because people who laugh find it difficult to throw punches. So we are going to ask the police to clap, or the people rather, to ask the police to clap. But every now and then we're going to lie on the road. Every now and then we're going to go to walk past a phalanx of armed guards and raise their fist. But we're going to have to show the police the direction to move in. They can never wait for us to arrive at Balgramian. We're going to say, oh, we're going to go this way. Oh, no, we won't. We'll go that way. And Ovsipyan is going to have to ask us, where are we going to go now? And one day, each day, we come up with a different story. So one day we decide to have this word. Can you all pronounce the word? Duchov. I love this because it's on a Mercedes-Benz. And when this happens, and this guy with the flag says this, well, there are people at Balgramian, people in Moscow, people in Washington, people in Tehran, people all over the place, wondering, what can we do? Some people say, there's going to be war in Artsakh. They're going to attack. But that fear didn't work this time. There was no ability to say to people, you're about to be attacked. Then some people would say, let's expect the third force. The Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. They didn't come. It's rumoured, and there is a lot of evidence in support, no concrete evidence, that yes, certain people flew from Yerevan to Moscow and said, we'd like to invite you. But they didn't come. Instead, what came was the people who said, as the network movie lead actor says, I'm not going to take it anymore. And so they implemented civil disobedience. Old people being carted away, young people deciding to draw pictures on shields, filmmakers deciding to use drone technology and thereby show that, no, it's not 50 people on Balgramian or 200 people or 3,000. No, it's 10,000. And we're near like the end of April. Oh my God, it's a couple of 100,000. And there's the army at the front. And there's 5 priests at the front. Oh, and there's a woman among the soldiers. And there's priests. Unexpected. And that night, out come the mobile devices. And what do the mobile devices do? They say, with their light, how many people there are. And so the YouTube streaming live video cameras come on, and we have 1.5 million views in the first channel, and then 422,000 in the second channel. There are literally millions of people watching this stuff. And it breaks the back of the regime. And so Sarkisyan said, okay, I'm going. Next day, it was back to usual. Everybody quietly did their stuff as they do on April 24. Meanwhile, Balgramian was not quiet. More people went there. Phone calls were made. everybody started to talk quietly. What are we going to do? And they made their decision, these 55. They decided they'd vote no. And so an election for who might be the acting Prime Minister, now that Sarkisyan had resigned, who might be the acting Prime Minister, an election was to be held. And while it was being held, live streamed, we have the famous Armenian middle finger message sent to some of the speakers. And then, if you were prepared to labour the 8, 9, 10 hours of talking and talking and talking, more questions being asked of the protest movement's leader over the 19 hours than Sarkisyan had been asked publicly over 10 years. But the 55 voted no. This man, Pashinyan, was not an appropriate acting Prime Minister. And so, what happened the next day? The Security Council met. Karim Karapetyan met with police, Foreign Minister, a few other officials. But what did the protest movement leader do on the same day? He had a press conference in 3 languages. He spoke English, Russian, Armenian, and at the beginning of the press conference somebody said, and he said, whatever comes. And so, horses came the next day. Horns came. Constant horns. Cars came. More cars came. More cars came. Trucks came. Little trucks came. Bicycles came. Prams came. People started to paint the streets. People started to play music in the streets. Dogs got happy. Ladies and gentlemen, can I ask for a round of applause for Charlo? It was time for Pashinyan, the protest movement's figurehead, to go and eat some bread and salt in the villages in Gyumri. It was time for people to put up their Republican Party identity papers on a laundry line in Gyumri. It was time for this guy to get happy. It was time for this lady to get happy. It was time for a bit of hugging. And so the next day, you always need lawyers. The next day, the lawyer on the right started to argue with Osipian on the left, saying, all right, I want to go into this building and I want some change to occur. So suddenly, the police were being approached by civilians, asking them to get out of the way and let us do what we need to do. So let's reflect on what this situation involves and how did we get here. Human beings lived for millennia, if not a million years, as tribes. Sometime, perhaps around 12,000 years ago, they formed institutions, they formed structures. And very quickly thereafter, markets started to form. And networks have always been there. Global networks have always been there. Do you know the longest line on the planet that you can walk is from Morocco, through the Gaza Strip, through the bottom of Armenia and Persia, all the way to China. That's the longest line in the world, geographically, that you can walk. And that line is where human beings did walk when they came out of Africa. So networks have always been there. There were networks in the 1920s when Armenians were desperately trying to keep things together, desperately trying to form a nation state after a horrendous genocide. Information is the key to a lot of these developments, and so one of the things that we've seen constantly is the use of code and information. And one of the things the protest movement leader has done a lot is change tactics. So one of these tactics was insist on the leadership having negotiations in front of the cameras. This is the famous 2-minute Sarkisian conversation set piece. This is what Sarkisian was looking at. This is what he didn't want to look at. Remember, his first sentence was something to the effect of words to that effect. Outside, he was, because of those cameras, heard, seen, and his behaviour judged. He wasn't in his private chambers. He wasn't on Bagramian. He was taken out of his element. He was brought screamingly into the future. And Facebook's been critical here. And all of these people sitting with goggles on are the Armenians of the last 3 weeks. And I don't know who the character walking is, other than Zuckerberg, but it's a different reality. Suddenly, a culture that felt separated became part of a digital reality. A digital reality that Obama, when surrounded by IT gurus, gets to benefit from. A digital reality that, before he becomes president and is president-elect, Donald Trump is surrounded by people from Apple and Google and Facebook, all sitting around him talking about how they're going to change tomorrow. Democracy is a very challenged institution, and that's what Armenians are trying to move towards. But I want to indicate to you, there are very few democracies in the world. I don't know of any real democracy in the world. I think you get close, perhaps, in some places in Europe. Democracy is in a state of chaos because of the pace of change, the nature of the effect of change on the economy, the fact that Western Europe and North America control so much of the world, and now they don't have as much access to that control. New people are rising up. So even a place like Australia is, as my first boss wrote in the book Reboot, published last year, he described Australia as a quasi-democracy. So Armenia, a very old land with a lot of culture, has to use tools. And here's a tool from 350,000 years ago, found in Norgebi 1. It's a stone tool. Armenians have to dig deep and find new tools if they wish to do those things that build culture, build wealth, build freedom of choice. Otherwise, they will be museum pieces. They need an enlightenment. They need their senses revitalized. They need to achieve their human potential by using what you see on this image, which is the human neuron at work. We are now on a network planet. We are one hive mind, given freedom for it to operate like that. The fact that the government of Armenia did not turn off the internet, I don't believe, was due to it being magnanimous. It's because it didn't know what was going on. It was believing its own hype in Bagramian. So, with the information we have now, what we need to be able to do is work out, where do we go from here? How do we deal with the future? Because as I said at the beginning, the future is much harder to work out than being a culture focused on preserving things, on being museum-like. No, now you have to create in order to exist. That is the reality. That's always been the reality with human DNA and human culture. It remains that today. Thank you.